Well, since I'm also the moderator, I'll cut my own time short. Today, I'll tell you about two different sort of case studies that we undertook. The first was at the Tejon Desert Rangeland Research Center, which is New Mexico State University's college ranch, and then as well at the Corona Livestock Research Center, which is another NMSU research center where there's a feedlot. Basically, what you're seeing here on the left, these four pastures are also part of a long-term agricultural research study. So we're tracking a breed comparison between two different desert adapted breeds, and we're collecting long-term vegetation transects there. So we're sort of overlapping and integrating all of these approaches to evaluate that. And this research area has actually been devoid of grass for a while. So our cows got sent north to the north end of the state to Clayton rather. And this is about 130 hectare sort of native rangeland paired with center pivot winter wheat pasture. And so the cows have access to both at various times of the year. And so in both situations, as Santiago pointed out, we're using this basic sort of LoRaWAN structure. So for those who don't know, LoRaWAN stands for Low Range Wide Area Network. And essentially what that means is the system is designed to send sort of small data packets with low battery consumption. And some of the theoretical advantages are, of course, that this type of data transmission can be sent over large areas, again, at low battery consumption, and then can also traverse sort of difficult to access terrain or vegetation types. And a couple of the virtual fencing presentations this morning, also we're using a LoRaWAN system. And then Derek also touched on this in his presentation. Basically, what's happening is this is the antenna gateway base station that Santiago was talking about. And this is the thing that communicates with the sensors. And then in our particular case, at least at the college ranch, we use the Wi-Fi backhaul. So basically what's happening is the LoRa system is tied into internet. This can happen through a variety of means. So when we were up in Clayton, we were tying it directly into like a hardwired application right into the Ethernet port. And so in either sense, it's this bidirectional pathway where you're sending data from the LoRa through the internet to the cloud, where the magic is essentially happening. This is where the data is being processed. And then it's being visualized on a dashboard. And this particular dashboard I'll talk about in a little bit, but this is like a proprietary one that came with the kit that we're working with. And another advantage of the system, of course, is that this is all happening in near real time. So if you want to change something on the actual sensors, you can do that on the dashboard and send the information in the opposite direction, which is potentially great for producers, of course, right? These are three specific tools that we're interested in exploring and that we've been evaluating. The first is a water level sensor, and this is a little bit of flavor of the data, the way that it comes in. These two sensors, this is a tip bucket rain gauge, and both of these everything is IoT capable, so Internet of Things capable, but these two are through Decent Lab, and this other one is through this French company that I'm talking about called Abbeyway, and they're tied in with Actility. Basically, in this first two scenarios, the data is sort of very visually. Oops, that might be a problem. The computer battery is running low. The data is basically very visually appealing and easy to understand. So for instance, the rain gauge is just showing us, as in any rain gauge scenario, the millimeters of precipitation through time, as opposed to this is what they call, it's a first generation GPS tracker through this company. And we actually put it in sort of these homemade collars, which were made of pelican rut cases. And then we, sewed them together and placed them on the cows. And this is, daily area explored metrics that we actually calculated. And basically what you're seeing is for this particular cow on the day of least area explored was when she calved. And so this is, again, getting to like what Colin was talking about this morning, this opportunity to sort of track like biosensing behaviors, things that are important, and animal welfare concerns. And so this is a example of how this particular system worked well enough to sort of do these types of calculations. This is another model, and I think Brandon had a similar model this morning, looking at the ability of the LoRaWAN system to, this is actually a line of sight model, so using the Fresnel zone. And so it's showing the line of sight relationship between the LoRa antenna and then the individual sensors, which is of course important for those cows who are moving around. The blue, the light blue and the dark blue are basically the best line of sight areas, and then the red is less, and then obviously areas where there's no color, there's no line of sight. But that didn't necessarily preclude us from collecting data in those non-line of sight areas, because again, this is the way that the LoRa system is set up to sort of deal with this type of scenario. These are our 4 study pastures. Again, these are all the GPS points for all the cows in those pastures over a 3-month period. So the bottom left pasture there, you can see had the most cows. There was 14 cows in there. And so there's also the most points. But when we looked at that individual GPS packet, fixed packets being retrieved per pasture, what we ended up seeing was that pasture 1 and pasture 4 sort of performed the best. And that it totally aligns with our analysis of the line of sight. There could be several other things sort of happening there. For instance, there was fewer cows in those pastures. And then there's a lot of sort of communication issues that we need to work out and learn along the way. So for instance, where there's a large blank in the data, actually the Wi-Fi went down that week at the ranch house. And so there was sort of all this communication feedback error. Additionally, after the Wi-Fi came back on, it became springtime and there was a bunch of trees at the ranch house that leafed out, and we think that may have precluded some of this packet transfer backwards as well. So there's a lot of these sort of little nuanced things. We also realized that there's 6 available channels to upload the LoRa data with, and we were only uploading all of our data on 1. So in the next trial, we actually took advantage of all these like preliminary findings and then made sure to account for them so that we could collect the highest quality data possible. I lost my cursor here. So this is just a very basic overview of the way that the Abbeyway dashboard looks like. We'll pull it off. All right. I'll blow through the rest of this. Yeah, this is fun. This is basically a very basic example of the dashboard that was available to us. And so you can see you can toggle the cursors on and off to see different animals moving around. You can see the pathways that the animals are actually moving. You can look at the different dates, so you can scroll back and forth to see the latest upload. And of course, it's near real time because it's we had these set at 15-minute GPS intervals. So, basically every 15 minutes it would load and you could refresh the page and be able to see where the animals were. In the second trial, Shalomia Namirukunge, my colleague, tried these collars out in sort of stationary fashion to see what the GPS bias looked like. So this is now happening at the Clayton Research Center. Basically, what you can see is on the left side, we tried 6 different field collars that were out in the open. We knew the exact spot of the GPS location, and then we looked at the bias between what the feedback from the actual GPS was versus its real location, and that was great. Actually, they were about 5 meters off, which I think is pretty standard for most of our store and board telemetry devices. On the other hand, when we tried them in a shed, which I think this was probably the worst setting that they would be in, this is under like a real steel structure, the GPS error was about 17 meters. So not great, but that's sort of showing you the extreme version of what might happen, and still also not terrible. You can see there's also increased variability. So there's other things sort of factoring into that as well. And then on the second generation devices, not the original ones I showed you, there's also built-in accelerometers. And so here again, you can see that we were basically seeing these fairly predictable diurnal patterns that we would expect from our other accelerometer devices. And so basically the point of this talk and of the study was to sort of show the feasibility of mounting one of these LoRaWAN systems, particularly this one that wasn't specifically initially designed for use of animal biosensors or any type of ranch infrastructure. And the rest of my colleagues will talk about this in the following presentations. But we also identified several areas for improvement, and I think these go along with those other LoRa talks that we heard this morning. So for instance, you've got to get your infrastructure developed appropriately and correctly. Data communication is critical, and there's several ways to go around doing that. For instance, our Wi-Fi backhaul may have been a bigger detriment than the actual LoRa system. But at the Clayton Research Center, when it was tied directly into like a hardwired connection, the performance was better. And now we're going to move into using sort of cellular data communication, because all these gateways are also equipped for that type of data transfer. And then, of course, the analysis and visualization that Santiago was talking to is going to be the obvious next steps. And but what's kind of nice about the system, even with its faults, the dashboard is usable, very user-friendly. The producer who we had using this was able to sort of log in the morning, check and see where the cows were. In a few events, cows were out of the pastures, and he was able to go find them in real time and bring them back to where they needed to be. In a really unfortunate event, one cow got hit by a car and died. And he also noticed that almost immediately, because just like Derek was talking about this morning, the GPS stopped moving, and that was a clear indication that something was wrong. And so basically, the big conclusion is that we're on our way, but there's definitely plenty of room for improvement.